This is Synopsis, a series of conversations in the framework of Avid Institute. I'm Neža Zupanc, and today's guest is James Pecore. James, very welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Neža. Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name is James Pecore. I'm a composer and also a pianist and performer. I also teach piano lessons. I live in New York, in Manhattan. I've lived here for 6 years, and as a composer and a pianist and a researcher. And I grew up in Portland, Oregon, on the West Coast originally of the US.
How did you start composing?
That's a great question. Music has always been a very integral part of my life from a very, very young age forward. We would have CDs in the car, and I would memorize mentally as a very young kid what each track number on each CD, what song that track would correspond to. And every playlist, every CD had a really wide variety of types of music. So as a little kid, I would go from The Sound of Music, which is a very classical kind of, which is a very kind of classic example of a music theater piece, to Handel's Messiah, which I really loved listening to Whitney Houston and Dolly Parton, and a wide variety of sounds and artists and methods of expression from very early on. And then from an early age on, I sang and played piano and took violin and later viola lessons. And so different ways of making music have always kind of been present in my life. And I think as I developed a vocabulary for expression, it gave me room later on in my life to want to add my own melodies and my own ways of communicating with the communities I'm a part of through music.
So in essence, you are saying you consider music to be a means of communication. Or is that simply one aspect as you look at it?
It can be. I don't know. I think music touches on every aspect of the human experience. And I think music can be so many different things and can be experienced through so many different metaphors. I think we can think of music as communication, as people inheriting and embodying stories from different cultural and aesthetic practices and embodying them together and communicating on a deeper, almost literary level of emotions and plots and even just pure experiences with one another. But I also think you could compare a musical environment or an experience to maybe an experience related to food, or coffee, or enjoying something that's been very carefully prepared for you by people who really care about you, or people in your community who have a very particular vision and sense of taste and texture and flavor that they want to impart to you. And neither of these is perfect metaphors. Music is not a language. A language is a way of abstracting both physical objects, like this pen, and also abstract concepts. And music can do that, but we're not going to use like notes to communicate physical objects yet. We could do that. It's just harder. It would take a lot more work. And music is not food, because it's not just you show up to a concert and you are served a plate of a symphony or a string quartet or any number of works. Like, it's not just for consumption is the main point. It's a living, embodied tradition of many people coming together to create something together, including the audience, like listening is inherently a part of feeding into the musical environment. Audience members are as much a part of the music as the musicians, just in a very different way. If there's a very engaged audience or a very excited audience, whatever energy the audience brings into the room feeds into the music in a very real way. So there are many, many ways of thinking of frameworks for music. There are scientific ways of thinking of music. There are ritual or religious ways of thinking of music. There are existential, metaphysical ways of thinking of music. There are physicalized ways of thinking of music, like dancing, and psychosomatics, and how is physical motion embodied through music. There are all of these different ways of getting to it, which I think is wonderful. I think it shows that, we're all very different as human beings. We all have very different interests and way of seeing the world and perceiving the world. But music finds a way to be continually accessible to every single one of us, regardless of regardless of where we're coming from. Some of my students in the past with piano lessons, some students are very visual learners. They love sight reading. They love being able to, visually analyze a piece and see the arc through the lines and the dots. Some students are very auditory and prefer, hearing a piece first or learning it by ear, especially the melody first, and then going through the notes or arranging it themselves in some jazz contexts. And some students are very kinesthetic learners. They prefer muscle memory. They prefer doing it again and again. And then once their neurons know it, once the physical body knows it, then it's become a part of them. So I think music is so much. It's hard to contain. And it's one of the best aspects of art. If it were limited in scope, it wouldn't be able to contain or approximate everything that we are as human beings, the full range of the human experience, which is incredibly broad, incredibly expansive. We can, you can go from gliding a plane in the American Midwest to scuba diving in Southeast Asia to climbing the Alps in Slovenia. These are incredible ranges of what we as human beings can experience in this world. And I think all of that range being able to be expressed through art, through music, through philosophy is wonderful and is astonishing. And so I guess to revise the earlier point, I do think music involves communication no matter what, but I think it very often tries to communicate about elements of the human experience that are too powerful or too unique to communicate with just words. Words fail, either just written on the page or just spoken. There's too much to communicate with just those words. And so the sounds, the other forms of art, visual art, perfumes and olfactory art, sculpture, all these different ways of shaping the human experience come into play. I do think art is directly and inextricably linked with experience. That's a really key part of my kind of practice and praxis. I think our ability, yes, I think our ability to perceive things as human beings and our experience of art as human beings is really key to our ability to connect and communicate those really complicated ideas with one another.
And as a educator, as you were already referring to your practice of teaching. Perhaps we can start with that. Does that, and if yes, how, uh, inform your compositional practice as well? You were already sort of going through different types of listening as you can observe them. Um, how do you see those two, the relation between the two?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I've found that the three experiences that have informed my musical practice the most have been one, playing or performing music. Like if I play a line on the piano, I know which lines on the piano are very easy for the fingers to navigate and which ones feel a little less possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just in a practical sense. The next set of experience would be music directing. So in college and university, I worked with various theatrical ensembles and other ensembles to produce productions of musical theater pieces like In the Heights and Fun Home. And currently I'm working on music directing a production in New York and Williamsburg of The Last 5 Years by Jason Robert Brown, a wonderful musical and incredible piece. And what I love about it is, you know, the role, my role within that, especially since it's mostly with peers, with people the same age as me, my role is not to instruct every single note and go through and try to um like explain almost patronizingly, this is this note, this is this note. We're not starting from square one. My role is to communicate the essence of the story, the essence of the experience of the music and what we're going towards, and then to break it down into pieces that we can focus on and that we can reflect on and analyze together. It's an incredibly enriching and energizing process. It's incredibly fun, I find, um,
Mhm.
for me and for collaborators, ideally. If we're able to find so much of ourselves in the music, we're able to bring ourselves to create more within that realm of music. The third experience is teaching. And, it's interesting as I've been teaching various age groups and in several different languages. I've taught in English, in French, and in Japanese, which are different ways of expressing ideas. The poetry of different languages lives in very different places in each language.
Speak all those languages?
I speak English and French well, and I've been learning Japanese for 2 years now, 2.5. I can't read it. I really can't. The kanji are
Mm-hmm.
beautiful, but there's so many. So I'm still slow on that, but enough to like instruct and communicate. Um, like korewa, bless. Um,
Thank you.
you're good. But I can communicate well enough to communicate something like korewa anata no hidari te, この指の番号は1、2、3、5、6、3、
Could
4、
have said
5.
anything right now. I don't speak a word.
It's fine. I think I messed up the numbering at first. I'm tired. I need more coffee, perhaps. But from that experience of teaching, uh, it's been a wonderful experience. I have really loved being able to go between different age groups. So the youngest I've taught um, was someone who's 4, a young pianist who's 4 years old. And I'm an uncle. I have one nephew and 3 younger nieces. And they're all fairly young right now. So working with those little kids is great. I've also taught high school age students, and I've also worked with substitute teaching for adults, adult beginners, and other folks. And what's been wonderful about this experience is, I find that working with younger kids, particularly like ages 5 through maybe 8, 9, is really good for me as an educator to learn, are they understanding it? Are they getting it? And are they making progress? Because if a kid looks at you and goes, "What's a note?" That's a really good question. They're still building this sense of scope for this small round dot is a way of abstracting emotion. It's a way of taking this physical motion that you use to interact with your instrument and representing it on a page so we remember what to do later. It's maybe a blueprint, or that's maybe one way of thinking of a composition or a piece or a etude or a practice. So if a kid is lost, if a kid doesn't understand what's going on or is consistently missing something, it's been an incredible help to my practice to be able to work with that student through that. And then working with high school students, so maybe age ranges kind of 14 through 18 generally, has been incredible for me in that we're just able to explore more complicated literature. Like the piano literature we can get into. So recently, some of my students and I have been working on some of the Bach inventions, some preludes by Chopin, some other works. You can get really complex forms of harmony, really complex forms of voice leading and motivic development and kind of complicated ideas. And you can have fun with it. Like they have the time and capacity and openness to dive into it, and they're not still at the point where it's like, these are so many notes, I'm scared, what's happening? You can break it down, you can analyze it, and you can work through it. So that's a really wonderful process, but it's a lot more like talking with peers than like talking with a very young student. One practice that I've been engaging with to kind of build music theory in a educational sense has been associating various notes with colors. So this is the process of going through all the major scales and associating the one chord and the one scale degree within the system with red, and then the two chord with orange and kind of Dorian with orange as a scale, and then 3 with yellow, 4 with green, 5 with blue, 6 with purple, 7 with pink. And the main reason I want to do this is because it's not about like synesthesia necessarily. It's about giving young people the ability to listen to a piece of music or to improvise a piece of music or to play a piece of music and to be able to say, oh, I know kind of what these patterns are, not just instinctually and not just on an abstract music theory level. I've seen this chord progression of 5 to 1 of blue to red 1,000 different times in all these different keys. I don't know. I've been hoping it's been a way of making kind of the smaller, like abstract methods of music theory more of a toolbox for people to pick up and integrate into their practice. Because it's one thing to like know how to play a piece, but it's another thing to know how it was built and how you can build something like it and why people are expressing one thing through one section of it with those chords, with those ideas, with those methods of expressivity, and I want people to have that deep connection with the music. And this is for particular chords and chord progressions and a particular type of Western classical and jazz music. There are other methods and other schools, of course, but I I think being able to have a personal relationship with the music and a frame through which you can explore the music, and not just to be able to read it, but to write it or to think and philosophize about it. Why are we doing a chord progression that's 4 to 5 to 3 to 6? Are there any elements of, maybe past progressions that are at work here? If one is the home key in this place, then not progressing toward one and going towards a minor form, does that have a bitter or a sad or a mournful feel in this context, or does it have a different affect? One other thing that's been really lovely about teaching, so I teach with a piano studio called Natalia Huang Piano Studios. They have a couple locations, one in New York, one in Greenwich, and one in Los Angeles, I believe. There may be more. I may be forgetting. But one thing that the studio does is practice challenges. And the practice challenge this past year has been, with the movie Inside Out, the Pixar movie for kids. We will ask kids, within this piece of music, how would the character Joy play this section of the music? What does joy sound like? How would sadness play this section of music? What would she play it like? How does disgust play this section of music? Is it very sassy or very like kind of more almost percussive or dynamic? How does fear play the music? And with the fear example, the kids will generally go to a higher range and have it be a little bit more nervous. It's that exercise has been an immense joy to explore, because even if an emotion like joy is very nuanced and complex, even if there are various types of joy, and it's hard to communicate an exact emotion with an abstract medium like music, because it's not one-to-one. There's no one idea of this is joy in music. That it varies by composer, by era, by expressive kind of goal, by philosophical definition of joy, by all of this. But even if there isn't that, the pursuit of what does joy mean to me in the context of this music, or what does sadness mean to me in music, just asking questions around where is the expressivity in this music, I think is incredibly productive and incredibly edifying. And it's tough. I mean, music isn't perfectly programmatic. There is an element of it that's abstract, and there is, and I think should always be room for, a piece is just prelude, is just a quartet. It expresses so many emotions, so many experiences, so much that trying to give it a title, the experience can't be contained with just that title. And I think there's room for that as well. But I do think, even within fully abstract experiences, as musicians, we still need to ask, what pieces of this piece, what sections of this work speak to me on an emotional level, on a flavor level of like this chord or this pitch class set, depending on if we're maybe in a classical or jazz context, or in a 12-tone serialist context, or these collections of overtones, if we're maybe in a spectralist context. These speak to me in these ways. I think that's wonderful. And something I've been reflecting on recently too are this is, this is a different direction, maybe philosophically I'm taking this right now. But a lot of people who are creative talk about, the influences of the Apollonian instinct, the Apollo instinct, and the Dionysian instinct, the Dionysus instinct, where, in the kind of Greek concept of this, Apollo is the instinct, the part of the creative human being that, edits, that is very ordered, that is very principled, that is very logical. And this is generally a desire toward logic and toward systemization and toward conscious understanding of everything. Whereas Dionysian creativity is this instinct toward throw everything at the wall creatively and see what sticks on the wall. And what sticks on the wall is the piece. It's free creativity without editing. It is expression, but also improvisation without concern for how does this part sound? How does this part sound? It's not about consciousness. It's about play, like playing music, like how kids play, freely without kind of concern for, is this the right way to slide down the slide? No, that's not the point. I think both of these processes are very essential. For me, when I'm writing a piece of music or when I'm working on a project, I don't think that creating something and editing that something should happen in the same time span. I really don't. I don't find it productive because I think that creatives need to step into the role of letting your inner child and the voice of your inner child be free to do whatever you want in that moment as you play. And then, when you're later on in the process, being able to look back at your playing and your practicing and say, hey, I keep missing this sequence of notes. Why? Oh, because, I haven't given enough time or practice to that one section to allow my fingers to memorize the shape of this chord, whatever it may be. Later on, you have the critical part of the process. I don't know. I've found immense joy in separating these two because I think it allows the kind of pure creative and unconscious instinct to have freedom. And then the job of the Apollonian, the Apollonian instinct, the kind of logical and ordered and principled force, is to take all of the improvisatory, all of the exploration, all of those elements of things, and to curate it, to manicure it, to assemble it into one experience where, you're able to present it and share it with people in a profound and powerful way. They work hand in hand, they go hand in hand, but I find that if I'm writing something or if I'm playing something, and if I'm stopping and starting every other measure to edit one little thing or to make this one little thing perfect, like if I get too lost in all the details and too perfectionistic with every little thing, I stop seeing the forest and I'm fixating on all the little trees. No, I can't do that. I can't do that. I need to keep my eyes on what is the larger goal of the piece. What is the story? What is the experience? What is the praxis? What are the progressions on an abstract level? what is it? What is the energy, the aesthetic essence of it? Keep your eye on the form, not on the shadows cast by the form. Keep your eye on the form, like in a Platonic sense. That's the goal. And then later, editing, later,
Mm-hmm.
um, synthesizing, all of that. Yeah, that's really been kind of the framework for creative practice that I've been focusing on these past years.
And all these aspects of this practice that you were now going through, could you go through them again and further elaborate? For example, um, also from the lens of what is present in most, if not all, of your compositions uh, via compositional practice. How do you get to a composition? Now, these categories that you were saying, like the aesthetic essence, the form, how what is your general conception of these, and perhaps how do they change from composition to composition, if they do?
Yes. I hesitate to say anything to it as thank you for that. It's a good question, but it gets tricky for me to elaborate and to generalize this as a process, partly because, if I'm working on one piece that exists in one genre and in one tradition, or adjacent to a couple genres and a couple traditions, like if you're working with material that is within pop or that kind of lens and medium, it often has lyrics, it often has a story, and it has these very well-known and well-conceived structures behind it, for better and worse. You have verse, chorus, bridge, final chorus, and then maybe an intro and an outro kind of bookending the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of interesting kind of reflections I've done on how this musical form corresponds with, not just maybe a religious service of, okay, there's a verse, a chorus, a verse, a chorus. Like not just
Mm-hmm.
a this is not just a experience that is secular or religious. It's just present everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even in non-pop traditions, like this form is very common. And part of me takes it to almost a like literary place of, okay, this is how a lawyer argues a case. This is a thesis statement with body paragraphs. You have the chorus is the thesis statement, is the main idea, is the main core essence of a work. A singer is communicating a very key element of the experience again and again and again with each chorus, and it's becoming more intense with each chorus. And then each verse is an example of that, is a key moment from some of that that you can feel, that you can experience, and that feeds back into that chorus. That's one way of looking at music, and
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
is very well within that tradition. And understanding the plot arc that emerges, the
Mm-hmm.
general
Mm-hmm.
form of that piece, I think is important. Understanding that verses can be different, and every time you revisit the chorus, you revisit the thesis, the main idea of the work. It needs to be stronger than before, or it needs to show you the point of what you've been doing a little bit differently from before. Um, that's a very different musical tradition in terms of um, chords and arrangements and that entire schema than the various music theories present within, let's say, Western classical music. Um, Within Western classical music, I hesitate to say that there's music theory, there's music theories. There's a lot of different frameworks that vary tradition to tradition, composer to performer. Uh, it's it's complicated, and that's part of it being a canon of hundreds of years of religious and folk songs and symphonic works and Lieder. And, it's a very, very complex, beautiful, sprawling tradition. And things aren't necessarily universal throughout it. In the majority of these pieces, there is a sense of octave equivalency. The note at 440 hertz, which is an A in our current tradition, the doubling of that, an A at 880 hertz, is also viewed as an A. That's pretty, I don't want to say universal, but very standard throughout Western classical music as a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And other cultures, most cultures in the world organically recognize octaves as equivalent, which is interesting to me, which is unique. That's not, it's like how, the majority of the languages throughout the entire world um, have a word for red and a word for blue, because these are some of the first colors that within our eyes kind of develop. So it makes sense that,
Mm-hmm.
some of the first colors we're able to hear within our ears are, oh, this human is making this tone, this human is making this tone. It
Mm-hmm.
makes sense that we can match these up. There's a creation of a subject, a tone, and a recognition of that subject or the sameness of that subject in that tone.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating because there aren't a ton of universals, so to speak, within music. Um, there are patterns and there are truths within music. There exists so many different types of musical form, and I could talk about musical form at length. Um, it exists, sonic form exists outside of tradition. I need to be very clear about that. The form of what you hear in a day, like
Mm-hmm.
just what sounds you hear in a given day, is a form. I get up, I hear the sounds of maybe the coffee maker, the bubbles boiling, the all of this. I
Mm-hmm.
listen to this music as I prepare for a work day. I go outside. I hear traffic because I live in New York. I hear the rattling of the subway. This is a form. This is a sonic experience. And it's a circular form because after work, after whatever sounds of work, I get home at the end of the day and it mirrors itself. I go back home on the subway, hear the subway experiences. I get home, I hear the same hot water boiling, this time for tea instead of coffee, and I go to bed. So within a piece shared with Avid earlier this year, the cello concerto, thank you all for that collaboration. By the way, I'm still in awe of that and of y'all. It's it's a work that's very dear and close to my heart. Within
Thank
this
you.
piece, yeah, of course, it's a joy. Within this piece, I wanted to do something kind of ambitious. And I wanted to incorporate elements of multiple musical forms or ways of thinking of music into one piece, one element. Um, and so I knew I wanted there to be kind of three peaks, um, in a sense of like classical plots, like classical storytelling. Like You have tension build up, build up, build up, and then a bit of release and a bit more silence and a bit more reflectiveness. Then you have tension build up more and more and more, and then release. And then when the electronics come back in section H, I think it is, you have the final build toward the final release, the final moment, and then that final release is the coming in of the bells, that final actually achieved resolution of the idea, and then everything starts pulling back. There's denouement, there's the falling action, the resolution of any ideas from before, synthesizing those ideas together, no no loose ends.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted there to be a circular nature to the piece. So just like how I get up and I hear the sounds of the tea kettle boiling and have coffee, and just like when I get home, I hear the sounds of the tea kettle boiling and have tea.
Mm-hmm.
Same process, but starting the day versus ending the day. I wanted there to be a similar element within the work where, you start the piece with these clusters. You could call them chords, you could call them pitch class sets. I've thought of them a couple different ways. You start the piece with the note C, and then it's a drone played by a lot of viola clusters, a lot of high harmonics. That's just me recording on the viola. um, and then you have the addition of multiple notes above and below it, expanding outwards and changing very quickly. When you have a cluster that has a lot of notes in one key or in one chord or in one idea, um, it's very easy to treat that cluster in my brain like a harp and make one flat, make one sharp, make these slight little changes, and it transports you to a very different world. It's a different method of composing than like it's this strange marriage between tonality and kind of 12 tone and serialist processes, um because there's both are beautiful ways of looking at music, but they're different lenses, they're different frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can think of a major chord as a major chord, you have the major interval on the between the lower pitches and the minor interval between the higher pitches. Or you could think of it as, what would it be in a 12-tone system? It'd be pitch class set. Is it 0 4 7? It's 0 4 7, right? Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
you can think of it both ways. I wanted those clusters to exist in both worlds at the same time and to embrace both worlds at the same time. Um, I also wanted the very beginning notes at the start of the piece to mirror the very closing notes at the end of the piece. So you start with the pitch C, you gain the pitches D flat afterwards, and then B flat afterwards. And then at the very end of the piece, you have this huge chord, this huge resolution in B flat, which is the tone of the lowest tone, I think, for the that sequence of the bells from St. Nicholas Cathedral, Nikolai, the Ljubljana bells. I knew I had to get back to those tones. I knew I had to resolve in the B flat. But then I knew I had to get back toward that original idea. So at the end, you have B flat gradually fading away as all of these pitches in that cluster gradually fade out. Then you have the D flat fade away, and you're just left with the note C, and with Urban and the cello back at the beginning, back at the start, having regained a sense of this entire story and this entire journey from there. The whole piece is meant to be leaving home, having an adventure, having these buildings of tension and resolution, and then returning home.
Mm-hmm.
And ideally, you're able to get to the end of the piece, end on that C, and then play the piece again. And it feels like one revolution, one loop. Um, so it's both. It's not one type of musical form, I guess is the larger point I want to say. Like it has elements of the kind of verse chorus form stuff, of the like, three peaks
Mm-hmm.
of ideas. But it also has the circular form aspect to it as well. And it's not a piece that exists in one genre really either. I mean, it's a love letter, I think, in many ways to classical music. It is a tradition I love very deeply, but it's a tradition that's very expansive. I mean, some pieces like as I've played a lot of different types of music in my life. And there's some moments in that piece where it reminds me a lot of my experience with early music, with Renaissance and medieval musics, where it focuses on chanting and singing and very pure tuning and drones. But those drones are the clusters. So that's in conversation with like the 12 tone and pitch class set world that happens centuries later. Or in the very in the very kind of in the restatement of those like clusters in section H, when the electronics come back in, when you have the really rhythmic yatata 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 yatata, all of those kind of fun, sharp, jetting rhythms. You have this exact same clusters at that section as at the very beginning of the piece. Same clusters.
Mm-hmm.
They build in a different way. They build to like a more tonal progression, um, with some type of C to some type of F, and then back into a more kind of tonicized landscape. But even like what would I call a genre there? I could say, okay, there's elements of these types of folk music traditions I've been a part of. It's very percussive and syncopated, but there's also the pitch class set thing. And so my kind of not solution, but mindset with this is I there's the Buddhist idea that identity isn't maybe as real as we think it is. I am James. Hi. But as a being, James, in a physical sense, I am, yes, all of the experiences I've lived through, all of the cells in my body, cells die, cells are recycled. And as I change on a daily basis, if I eat celery as opposed to cucumber, that changes part of my biological makeup for the day. We are creatures of constant change, and we literally contain multitudes. There are so many ways of viewing each one of us as individual human beings, and so many ways of viewing individual genres and individual pieces that I think some of the best music starts to defy categorization. Um, where I don't know what genre this is. Let's call it classical. And it is,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a love of sound beyond just that, present within it. And there's a love of all these different elements of classical music, um, that are very different from each other. Medieval chant is very different from kind of Skladateljian like romanticism, if Ravel wasn't a romantic, or impressionism, well, however people try to categorize them. Um, yeah, it's it's a lot. I do think musical form is, I don't want to say important, but I think it's very useful to have an idea of storytelling present in music on a level of how is the audience experiencing and receiving these these ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I try to always wonder about, what is the in
Mm-hmm.
of an audience member, if that makes sense. Like let's say you're a 7-year old who likes music but has never played an instrument before, and you go to a concert. What are the elements of that concert that make you feel excitement, that make you feel fear, that make you feel an experience within the piece, within the music? Elements of emotions, I hesitate to even call them emotions, sometimes just experiences, sometimes just gut, words fail. What are those things that make you say, I want to learn how to play flute or piano or yeah. And so I do think that, you know, composition is wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
performance is wonderful, teaching is wonderful, all those elements of these things are wonderful. But I also think that community engagement and saying, hey, this is a really wonderful, wonderful aspect of my life that has given so much to me as a human being. I would really love for you to come and to enjoy this piece, these collaborations, this community, and also to bring people who you think might have fun there or enjoy it or whatever it is. Because I mean, at worst, I do think it can come across as like marketing conversations. How do we market classical music? I think marketing can have a very positive side to it and a very kind of negative side to it. I think the positive side comes from, you know, this is what we want to create. This is what we love about music. These are all the wonderful things. And then the negative element of marketing is like, does it feel more commercialized or more kind of commodified for us to communicate these experiences in maybe an email blast, um, advertising, that entire thing. And it's a real question, like how does one person communicate, hey, this experience is amazing, this experience is great, you should come be a part of this. How do you communicate that with a person through a website, through emails about the events, through text, through all of these digital mediums? Because I'm holding on my phone. Yeah. It's a digital medium. It's a digital media. It is an instrument through which it's an instrument through which we try to communicate ideas. But like an instrument, sometimes even the most complex ideas are difficult to fully communicate through it. And I think it's hard, but I think it's still worth doing and worth engaging with, worth saying, I know you get 1,000 emails from 1,000 different arts organizations a year. This is a really wonderful community to be a part of. Please come join. Please come be a part of it. Um, One other thought, because I keep thinking of this. I don't know why. I I earlier on in my life, I studied a lot of English literature and philosophy and all of these things, and I love these things very deeply. And I think everyone should read, everyone should write, everyone should do all of these things. They're wonderful. Um, there's one idea of language as an expedient that I keep coming back to musically and otherwise. And this is the idea that, language takes an object or an action or whatever it is. I take this pen and I call it by name. I create a sonic experience with my voice that assigns an identity to that object or that action or whatever it is, that thing, that noun, to talk about it, to communicate ideas about it, to frame it in a certain context, all of these different things. Each word can try to capture the essence of that object or that experience or whatever, but fails to communicate the inner being of that thing. This is like a very easy way of explaining Plato's idea of like the forms. Like you have an apple. The word apple in English, or in the German in Apfel, is meant to communicate the experience of seeing, of eating an apple. It is. You have the you have the like roundness of the open vowel. You have the plumpness, the roundness of the plosive of the p, apple. And so you're almost miming the experience of eating an apple while you're eating the apple, while you're saying the word. This is where poetry comes from. This is the French idea, the French symbolist idea, maybe, that's strain of poetry, that like the sounds of the words communicate essential essences of those words or those ideas. This is why automatopoeia exists. Automatopoeia is like, you bang your hand on a table or something by accident. Bang is the sound, but it's also the experience. You get the percussiveness of it from that experience. The main point I want to make with this is that, eating an apple, how do you communicate that with words? How do you communicate the taste of an apple with words? You can think and you can reflect on the poetry of the word apple, apfel, the roundness, the softness, the construction of the piece of saying the word. But the core essence communicated by just eating an apple is sublime, is beyond, you need to try it yourself to understand. And I think there's a similar thing with music. Getting to the actual core of the piece, the taste of the apple. How do you do that? You maybe you can with music, maybe you can't. But you can reach towards it. You can use this method of artifice, of language, of constructing a musical idea to communicate bits of what that apple is, either universally or just to you. This is what an apple means to me. And
what
even
sound the apple is, right? Apple,
yeah,
or apfel, or la pomme. So
la pomme,
each
yeah.
nation has according to this, each nation has a very different sound of biting into the apple.
Yes, and one of my interests as of late has been musical linguistics. I don't know if that's a field. I might just be making this up now, but I'm pretty sure it's a field. It's probably a field. But even if I talk about it, like in German, Apfel is neuter, right? Like the gender is neuter. In French and in French, Spanish, Italian, like Romance language descendant of Latin, it's they have the gendered background towards it. It's la pomme, which has elements of like cultural ideas, human ideas of gender, of masculinity, femininity projected onto the apple, which is kind of strange. It's unconscious. It's this like, you know, people study this. People say, hey, architecture changes from this one culture to this other one because bridge in this one culture has a masculine connotation. So they try to make the angles sharper, closer to maybe these ideas of what masculinity is, then within this other culture that feminizes it, that tries to include more ovals or different types of shapes. So there's a gendered element to it that can be projected into it. And there's different experiences within an apple. Maybe the apple was sweet. Maybe the apple was tart. Maybe the apple was very crisp and crunchy. Maybe it was soft. Maybe it was rotten. Who knows? Um, of there are different ways to communicate what an apple being crisp is. That thing is like then from the roundness of an apple. Like I think apple as a linguistic way of calling an apple is, ah is the opening of the mouth. It's this tall, resonant ah, and then full is partly the consuming of the apple, maybe, or the smoothness of the apple, you could say. Uh, uh, yeah. So within French, si on veut discuter en français la pomme, you get the roundness through pomme, and you get a little bit of the lingering flavor with that that me tacked on to the end, pomme. You hear the mouth closing and take a second to taste the apple itself. But you don't get any crispness from that word. You don't, not at all. You get the plosive of pomme, but you don't have a like cra or like something plosive. You have a plosive with p, but you don't have a like hard cut consonant. Whereas in like the Japanese concept of it would be the word is what is the word for apple? Am I forgetting it? Is it ringo? Ringo, I think. I want to double check this.
Perhaps
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can, after
It's
this,
apple. Yes.
um,
Um, but yeah, you get more of the sharpness of maybe the crispness from the bean. Like I hear that more as the like biting into the apple. Um,
so if
thank you for the
someone
aside.
keeps
Yeah.
track of what you will continue working on or of the works that you will publish in the future, um, we can expect to hear more of the musical linguistics.
I think so. You can expect to hear a lot. Every piece is a little, at least a little different. Every piece exists within its own world. Every experience communicates a very different set of ideas and experiences. I th if you follow the music I'm writing, the music I'm producing, the ideas engaging with, you will hear more and more experimentation and efforts towards expressivity and grasping on to the core of what an experience can be, the core of the apple, so to speak, um, than ever before in a lot of different genres and a lot of different methodologies, but always with a deep love of music, of the community behind it, and of apple, of sharing the experience of eating and tasting something sublime together.
And on that note, I would kindly ask you to, we're concluding this conversation, and I would kindly ask you for two messages.
Mm-hmm.
One for any aspiring composers, and acknowledging you're also, we're all still learning, but nevertheless. And the second one for anyone that will go and listen to your music.
Yes. A message for other young composers and aspiring composers, from me would be, this is tricky because I'm also young, so I'm sure my answer will be different in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah,
But
completely possible, but nevertheless, at this
yeah,
point.
yeah, my message to young and aspiring composers and musicians and artists and creatives would be, stop procrastinating. You will never, if you keep asking, when will I be ready to do this? When will I be ready to do this? There might not ever be a day when you feel ready to do it. Sometimes sometimes you just need to do it. Go create something. It won't be perfect. You might not even think that it's that good when you first start creating. It doesn't need to be. 10 years later, if you've created something every day, that will still be worth it. And maybe by that point, you will have created a lot of things that you really love. And it'd be such a waste and such a shame if you didn't create because you were afraid of it not being good enough. It will be good enough. Just give it the love, give it time, give yourself space to be free and create and exist in community with other creatives, and have faith in it because other people have created before and that same power exists within you. And the other message, what was the other message to
Any
who?
future listeners, maybe someone that will hear this conversation and go listen to your music.
Yeah. Um, Thank you for listening to my music. Most creatives spend hours, days, months, years creating something. It's not a quick process at all. It takes so much time, thought, and effort. I hope that every piece you listen to that I've had a hand in creating deepens your experience as a human being in some way, makes you more excited to be alive in some way. Thank you for listening. I hope you keep listening, not just to me, but to all of these other creatives in the United States, in North America, in South America, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, all across the world, because we are more interconnected now than ever before through digital media, through other things. We are more creative and creatively able to listen to other people and to experience the full range of the human experience than ever before. Listen, enjoy.
James Pecore, thank you for contributing to this conversation. Thank you for sharing.